You ever feel like life just flips the table on you when you least expect it? 1 minute you're cruising, everything steady, predictable, maybe even a little too comfortable, and then out of nowhere, bam. The job you thought was secure? Gone. The person you thought would always be there walks away. The future you were so sure about just disappears. And suddenly, you're left standing in the middle of the wreckage, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. I remember this one night. It's burned into my brain like a scene from a movie. I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at a candle flickering on the table. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. My chest was tight, my stomach heavy, and my brain wouldn't shut up. I kept running through every what if imaginable, trying to make sense of something that had just unraveled in front of me. It's that feeling, you know? When something you thought was solid just isn't anymore. And you keep asking yourself, why? Why is this happening? Why now? But here's the thing, I wish I had known that night. Maybe the better question isn't why is this happening? Maybe it's what is this teaching me? Because the truth is, it's not change that wrecks us. It's the way we fight against it. You ever notice how life has this funny way of turning everything upside down just when you start to feel comfortable? 1 minute you're coasting, job's good, relationships are stable, everything feels predictable, and then out of nowhere, boom, something shifts. A call in the middle of the night. A job you thought was secure suddenly gone. A person you love walking away. And just like that, the ground beneath you isn't so solid anymore. I remember this one night, sitting alone in my apartment, staring at a candle flickering on the table. It was quiet, too quiet. Hours earlier, something I thought I could never live without had been ripped away from me. My chest felt tight, my stomach heavy, my mind racing through every what if imaginable. It's that feeling, you know? When life doesn't go the way you planned, when the future you imagined is suddenly out of reach. If you've ever been there, you know how it feels like standing in the ocean, just as a massive wave is about to crash over you. There's no escape, and in that moment, one thought keeps circling in your head. Why? Buddhism has a way of answering that question, not with some sugar-coated reassurance that everything happens for a reason, but with something much deeper, something that shifts the way you see life itself. At the core of it all is this one simple truth. Everything changes. Nothing stays the same. Your emotions, your relationships, your body, your thoughts. Everything is constantly moving, flowing, transforming. It's called anicca, impermanence. And the crazy thing? It's not change itself that hurts us. It's our resistance to it. Think about it. Have you ever tried holding on to something that was slipping away? A relationship that had run its course? A job that no longer fulfilled you? A version of yourself that you had outgrown? The harder you cling, the more painful it becomes. It's like holding on to a handful of sand. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. That's suffering. Not because life is cruel, but because we expect things to stay the same when they never do. Look at the trees in autumn. Do they cry when their leaves start falling? Do they panic, desperately trying to glue them back on? No, they just let them go. Because deep down, they trust that spring will bring new leaves. But imagine if a tree resisted, holding on to every dried up leaf, refusing to let go. It would suffocate itself under the weight of what was never meant to stay. And that's what we do to ourselves when we resist the natural flow of life. I used to think letting go meant losing, that if I accepted change, I was giving up. But that's not it at all. Letting go isn't about surrendering. It's about making space. It's about understanding that when something leaves your life, it's making room for something new. It's about trusting that, even when you can't see it yet, life is unfolding exactly the way it's supposed to. A while back, a friend of mine lost his job. He was devastated. This was the career he had built for years, the thing that gave him purpose. For weeks, he was stuck in this loop of, why me? And this isn't fair. But then, something shifted. Instead of fighting what had already happened, he started asking himself a different question. What if this isn't the end? What if this is just the beginning of something else? And you know what? A few months later, an opportunity he never could have imagined landed in his lap. Something that gave him more freedom, more fulfillment than he'd ever had before. Looking back, he told me, "Losing that job was the best thing that ever happened to me. I just didn't know it at the time." It's funny how life works like that. When you're in the middle of change, it feels like everything is falling apart. But often, it's just falling into place in ways you don't understand yet. I think about the caterpillar trapped inside its cocoon. If it had a mind like ours, it would probably be freaking out. What's happening to me? Everything I knew is gone. This is the end. But what it doesn't realize is that it's transforming. It has no idea that on the other side of all that struggle, it's going to grow wings. So what if, instead of fearing change, we started seeing it as a teacher? What if we stopped seeing endings as something to grieve and started seeing them as invitations? An open door to something we never could have imagined for ourselves. What if the things we're afraid of losing were never meant to stay forever? I'm not saying it's easy. Letting go of something that once meant everything to you is one of the hardest things in the world. But what's even harder is holding on to something that's already gone. I heard this story once about a potter. He was making this beautiful clay pot, shaping it carefully, pouring his heart into it. But just as he was about to finish, he dropped it. It shattered into 100 pieces. At first, he thought it was ruined. But instead of throwing it away, he did something different. He picked up the broken pieces and started putting them back together. Only this time, he filled the cracks with gold. And when he was finished, the pot was even more beautiful than before. Stronger, more unique, more alive with its story. That's what life does to us. We break. We lose things. We go through pain we never saw coming. But those cracks, that's where the light gets in. That's where we grow. So if you're in the middle of a change that feels unbearable, if you're standing in the wreckage of what used to be your life, I want you to ask yourself this. What if this isn't breaking you? What if this is remaking you? Because life is always moving, always changing. And the sooner we stop resisting, the sooner we can step into the next version of ourselves, the version that was waiting all along. And maybe, just maybe, one day you'll look back at this moment and realize it wasn't the end at all. It was just the beginning. You ever wake up one day and realize that nothing in your life looks the way you thought it would? Like you had this plan, this picture in your head of how things were supposed to go, and then life just decided otherwise. Maybe it was a job you thought would last forever but didn't. Maybe it was a relationship you swore would be your forever but wasn't. Maybe it was a version of yourself that you believed in, only to wake up one day and not recognize who you've become. And when that happens, when life shifts under your feet without warning, there's this overwhelming feeling of what now? I remember sitting on my balcony one night, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The rain had just stopped, leaving the air thick with that clean, earthy smell. I was holding a cup of tea, but it had gone cold in my hands because my mind was somewhere else. Everything I had built, everything I had relied on, had unraveled in a matter of weeks. A relationship I thought would last, over. A career I had poured my heart into, gone. The future I had planned, completely wiped out. And I sat there, staring out at a world that kept moving, wondering how mine had come to a full stop. It's a strange thing when life changes before you're ready. One minute, everything feels stable, and the next, it's like you're standing on shifting sand. No footing, no control, no idea what comes next. And the only thought that keeps circling in your head is why? Why is this happening to me? But here's something I wish I had understood back then. Nothing lasts. Not the happiness, not the pain, not even the version of myself that was sitting on that balcony, convinced my world had ended. I didn't know it at the time, but that night wasn't my breaking point. It was my turning point, because if Buddhism has taught me anything, it's that the only thing guaranteed in life is change. Everything moves, everything shifts, everything transforms. And the real suffering, it doesn't come from change itself, it comes from the way we fight against it. Think about it. We hold on to people afraid to lose them. We grip tightly to jobs, identities, dreams, desperate to keep them exactly as they are. But life is like water. It flows, it moves, it reshapes itself every second. And the more we try to hold on to it, the more it slips through our fingers. Imagine standing in the middle of a river, the current pushing against you. You can plant your feet, resist with everything you have, but eventually the water wins. Or you can let go. You can lift your feet and allow yourself to be carried, not knowing where the river will take you, but trusting that it knows the way. There's a Japanese concept called mono no aware, a deep appreciation for the fleeting nature of things. That's why cherry blossoms are celebrated, not because they last, but because they don't. Their beauty is in their impermanence. Now think of a tree in autumn. It doesn't cling to its leaves, begging them to stay. It lets them go, knowing that spring will bring new ones. But we, as humans, we struggle with that. We grip tightly to what's already leaving, afraid that if we let go, we'll be left with nothing. But the truth is, letting go isn't about losing. It's about making space for what's next. I once knew a man who built his entire life around his business. It was everything to him, his identity, his pride, his reason for waking up in the morning. And then suddenly he lost it all. For months he was consumed by anger, regret, grief. He kept replaying every decision, wondering what he could have done differently. But then one day, instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" he asked, "What is this teaching me?" And that shift changed everything. He realized that who he was wasn't tied to what he had built. That losing one thing made space for another. That, like the tree in autumn, he could let go and trust that something new would grow in its place. And it did. It's funny how life works like that. When you're in the middle of change, it feels like everything is falling apart. But often, it's just falling into place in ways you don't understand yet. A caterpillar doesn't know it's about to become a butterfly. To it, the cocoon must feel like the end. But we know better. We know that transformation is happening. So what if we started seeing our own losses that way? What if, instead of grieving every ending, we started welcoming them as invitations to something we can't yet see? It's not easy. Letting go of something that once meant everything to you is one of the hardest things in the world. But you know what's even harder? Holding on to something that's already gone. There's a Zen saying I love, "Let go or be dragged." Because life will keep moving whether we're ready or not. Change will come. The only question is, are we going to flow with it or fight against it? There's an old Japanese practice called Kintsugi. It's the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, they highlight them, because they believe something that has been broken and put back together is even more beautiful than before. And maybe that's what change does to us. It breaks us open, forces us to rebuild. But if we do it with care, with trust, with an open heart, we don't just return to who we were. We become something more. So if you're standing in the middle of change, feeling like everything is falling apart, just remember, you are not breaking. You are becoming. And maybe, just maybe, one day you'll look back on this moment and realize it was never the end at all. It was just the beginning of a life you never could have imagined for yourself. You ever hold on to something so tightly, afraid that if you let go, you'd lose a part of yourself? A relationship, a dream, a version of life you thought would last forever. And then one day, despite everything you did to keep it, it slips away anyway. And you're left standing there, hands empty, wondering how to move forward. I remember the exact moment I realized I was clinging to something that was already gone. It was late at night, and I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at my phone. The last text I had sent was still sitting there, unread. Hours had passed, then days, and I kept checking, waiting for a response that would never come. I told myself that if I just held on a little longer, if I just said the right thing, if I just didn't let go, maybe things would go back to how they were. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Some things aren't meant to stay, and yet I couldn't accept it. It's funny how we convince ourselves that holding on is strength, when sometimes the real strength is in letting go. Buddhism teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. We suffer not because things leave us, but because we refuse to let them go. We grip tightly to what once made us happy, believing that if we lose it, we lose happiness itself. But happiness was never in the thing, it was in us, in the way we experienced it. And if we let it, happiness can return in a different form. But letting go is terrifying, isn't it? Feels like free falling, like stepping off a ledge and hoping something catches you. Because if we release the things we've built our identity around, the relationship, the success, the version of life we thought we were supposed to have, then who are we without them? A monk once told his student, "Holding on to anger is like holding a hot coal. You're the one who gets burned." But it's not just anger. It's anything we refuse to release. Regret, expectations, even love. We grip it so hard, afraid that if we let it go, we'll be left with nothing. But what if the space it leaves behind isn't emptiness? What if it's room for something new? I think about trees in autumn. They don't fight to keep their leaves. They don't mourn when the branches are bare. They trust that when the time is right, new leaves will grow. But we try to glue the leaves back on. We resist the seasons of our own lives, forgetting that everything is temporary. I once heard a story about a man who had spent years sculpting a beautiful statue out of stone. He poured his heart into every detail, shaping it with precision, believing it was his masterpiece. Then one day a storm came. The winds howled, the rain pounded, and when the sky cleared, his statue had cracked down the middle. He was devastated. He sat there for days, staring at what was left of his work, unable to accept what had happened. Then, finally, something shifted. Instead of seeing it as ruined, he saw it as unfinished. He picked up his tools and started carving again. This time, he let the cracks become part of the design. And when he was done, the statue was more beautiful than before. That's what letting go does. It doesn't erase what was. It allows us to reshape what's left into something new. But how do we actually do it? How do we release the things we've built our lives around without losing ourselves in the process? First, detach with love. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you love without possession. It means you appreciate something for what it was, instead of holding it hostage for what you wanted it to be. If a person leaves, it doesn't mean your love was wasted. If a dream changes, it doesn't mean the journey was meaningless. It simply means it's time for a new chapter. Second, understand that loss is not the enemy. It's the doorway to something else. We see loss as an ending, but what if it's actually an invitation? Think about it. Every new phase of your life only began because something else ended. You wouldn't be who you are now if not for the things you once had to say goodbye to. And third, practice gratitude for what is, instead of fearing what will be lost. If we spend our whole lives bracing for change, terrified of what we might lose, we miss out on everything we still have. Right now, in this moment, there is something beautiful in your life. Person and experience a small joy. Breathe it in. Let yourself feel it fully, knowing that it won't last forever. And that's what makes it precious. I think about that night on my apartment floor, staring at my phone, waiting for something that wasn't coming. If I could go back to that version of myself, I'd sit down beside them and whisper, "You're holding on to something that is already gone, and that's okay. Let it go. Something else is coming." And you know what? Something did. Because life doesn't leave us empty-handed. It just asks us to open our hands so it can place something new in them. So tell me, what are you still holding on to? And what might be waiting for you if you let it go? You ever notice how life has this way of completely ignoring your plans? One minute, everything feels like it's falling into place, and then, out of nowhere, it shifts. The job you thought you'd have forever is suddenly gone. The person you imagined growing old with becomes a stranger. A dream you nurtured for years crumbles before your eyes, and you sit there, staring at the pieces, asking yourself the same question over and over again. Why is this happening to me? I remember the day I learned what it really meant to surrender to life. It wasn't in a monastery or during some profound meditation session. It was on a cold, rainy afternoon, sitting in my car outside a coffee shop, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had just received the kind of news that makes your stomach drop, the kind that forces you to face a future you never saw coming. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built was unraveling, and no matter how much I tried to hold it together, no matter how hard I fought, life had made its decision. I sat there in silence, watching raindrops race down the windshield, my mind cycling through all the things I could have done differently. If only I had tried harder. If only I had seen it coming. If only I could fix it. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Some things are out of our control, and the more we resist them, the more we suffer. Buddhism teaches that acceptance is the key to peace, but let's be honest. Accepting the things we don't want to be true is one of the hardest things we'll ever do. We don't want to let go of the illusion that we're in control. We don't want to believe that sometimes, no matter how much effort we put in, life has other plans. But the truth is, peace doesn't come from control. It comes from knowing that even when things don't go our way, they're still going the way they're meant to. There's an old Zen story about a farmer who lived in a small village. One day, his horse ran away. The neighbors came to comfort him, saying, "What bad luck!" But the farmer simply shrugged and said, "Who knows if it's good or bad?" A week later, the horse returned, bringing with it a group of wild horses. The neighbors rejoiced, saying, "What good luck!" But again, the farmer only said, "Who knows?" Soon after, the farmer's son tried to tame one of the wild horses and fell, breaking his leg. The neighbors were quick to say, "What a terrible misfortune!" But the farmer, unfazed, replied, "Who knows?" Then, just a few weeks later, soldiers came through the village, recruiting young men for war. But because of his broken leg, the farmer's son was spared. What seems bad today might turn out to be the best thing for us tomorrow. And what we call good in the moment might later reveal itself to be something else entirely. We just don't know. I think about that story a lot, especially when life doesn't go the way I want it to. There have been moments where I was convinced that something was a disaster, only to realize later that it was the very thing that set me free. And other times, things I thought were blessings ended up teaching me some of the hardest lessons of my life. So maybe the real question isn't, why is this happening to me? Maybe the real question is, what is this trying to teach me? I once met a woman who had lost everything. Her home, her business, the life she had spent years building. For a long time, she was stuck in that cycle of resistance, trapped in the "this shouldn't have happened" mindset. And then one day she made a choice. She decided to stop asking why and start asking what now. Instead of fighting against reality, she worked with it. She let go of the life she thought she was supposed to have and opened herself up to the one that was waiting for her. And what she found on the other side of surrender was a peace she had never known before. That's the thing about acceptance. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you don't try. It just means you recognize that some battles aren't meant to be fought. It means you understand that not everything needs to be controlled. So how do we actually do it? How do we stop fighting against reality and start making peace with it? First, we stop fighting what already is. So much of our suffering comes from arguing with the present moment, from wishing things were different instead of working with what we have. Imagine trying to fight the wind. It doesn't matter how strong you are, you're never going to win. But the moment you stop resisting, that's when you can start moving forward. Second, we find meaning in difficulties. No one likes pain. No one likes struggle. But every challenge carries a lesson. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's strength. Sometimes it's the realization that what we were clinging to wasn't meant for us in the first place. Whatever it is, there's always something to learn. And third, we trust that the universe knows what it's doing, even when we don't, even when everything feels like it's falling apart, even when we have no idea how things are going to work out. There have been moments in my life where I thought everything was lost, only to realize months or years later that what I thought was an ending was actually a beginning. I come back to that night in my car sometimes, to the version of me that was gripping the steering wheel, desperately trying to hold onto something that was already gone. If I could sit next to them now, I wouldn't try to fix it. I wouldn't tell them not to feel what they were feeling. I would just put a hand on their shoulder and say, "You don't have to fight this. You don't have to know what's coming next. Just trust that whatever is falling apart is making space for something new. Because life will keep moving. Doors will close. Plans will change. People will come and go. And the only real question is, are you going to fight against it? Or are you going to trust that, even when you don't understand it yet, things are unfolding exactly as they should?" So tell me, what is life asking you to accept today? And what might be waiting for you on the other side of surrender? Have you ever felt like life was testing you? Like every time you try to stand back up, something knocked you down again. There was a time when I asked myself that question almost every single day. It felt like life had decided to throw every challenge it could at me, and I couldn't understand why. I had lost someone I loved, watched a dream slip through my fingers, and found myself standing in the middle of a life I no longer recognized. And the worst part? No one could tell me when the storm would pass. I remember one particular night, late, past midnight. The world outside my window was quiet, but inside my mind, a war was raging. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling this deep, hollow ache in my chest. Why is this happening to me? The question looped over and over in my head. I wanted answers. I wanted something, anything, to make the pain make sense. But all I got was silence. And then, somewhere in that silence, a thought emerged, soft but insistent. What if this isn't just happening to me? What if this is happening for me? It wasn't a comforting thought at first. Felt ridiculous, even offensive. How could loss, heartbreak, failure, how could any of this possibly be happening for me? But that question, it wouldn't let go. And the more I sat with it, the more I started to see something I hadn't before. Maybe life wasn't punishing me. Maybe it was teaching me. Pain is a ruthless teacher, but it's also the most effective one. There's this story in Buddhism about a caterpillar. When the time comes for it to transform, it seals itself inside a cocoon, its body dissolving into something unrecognizable. And then comes the struggle, the fight to break free. It pushes and writhes, struggling against the shell that once protected it. And here's the thing, if someone were to help it, to break the cocoon open too soon, the butterfly wouldn't survive. It wouldn't have the strength to fly. That struggle? It's necessary. And isn't that how life works? The things that challenge us, the moments that break us open, those are the very things that shape us into who we are meant to be. But the catch is, we have to be willing to learn. Because pain doesn't automatically make us wise. If we resist it, if we drown in self-pity, we miss the lesson entirely. But if we lean in, if we ask, what is this trying to teach me? That's when pain becomes wisdom. I once knew a man who lost everything overnight. His business, his savings, the life he had spent years building. At first, he was consumed by anger. He spent months blaming the world, convinced that life had been unfair to him. But one day, he met a retired entrepreneur who had gone through something similar. The old man listened patiently, then said, "You have two choices. You can sit in the ashes of what you lost, or you can use them to build something new. The fire has already come, whether you like it or not. The question is, are you going to let it destroy you or refine you?" That conversation changed everything for him. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" he started asking, "What can I create from this?" And slowly he rebuilt. Not the same life, but a new one. One that was lighter, freer, and filled with things he never would have had if he hadn't first lost it all. I think about that a lot. How sometimes what feels like an ending is really an invitation. An invitation to let go of what no longer serves us. An invitation to become something more than we were before. So how do we do it? How do we take pain, the thing we spend our whole lives trying to avoid, and turn it into something that helps us grow? First, instead of resisting it, we observe it. Pain is uncomfortable, but it has something to say. What if, instead of trying to escape it, we got curious? What is this teaching me? What patterns is it revealing? The lessons are always there, waiting for us to see them. Second, we trust that everything, even the hard stuff, is for our growth. I know how impossible that sounds when you're in the middle of it. But think about all the things you've survived. How many of them, in hindsight, led you somewhere unexpected? How many of them made you stronger, wiser, more compassionate? What if this moment is doing the same? And third, we shift from victim to student. Instead of asking, "Why me?" we start asking, "What now?" Because the truth is, life owes us nothing. Not fairness, not predictability, not immunity from pain. But it does offer us something even more valuable, the opportunity to transform. There's this practice in Japan called Kintsugi. When a piece of pottery breaks, instead of throwing it away, they repair it with gold. The cracks aren't hidden, they're highlighted. Because in their culture, They believe that something which has been broken and put back together is more beautiful than something that has never been broken at all. That's how I see life now. We all break. We all go through things that change us forever. But if we choose to, we can fill those cracks with gold. We can become stronger, not despite what we've been through, but because of it. I don't know what you're going through right now. I don't know what kind of pain life has handed you. But I do know this: you're not being destroyed. You're being reshaped. And one day you're going to look back on this moment and see it for what it really was. The beginning of something new. So tell me, what is life teaching you right now? And what will you do with the lesson? Ever feel like you're living everywhere except where you actually are? I was sitting in a cafe the other day watching people go about their lives. Across from me, a guy was scrolling on his phone, his untouched coffee growing cold. A few tables over, a woman was nodding at her friend's words, but you could tell her mind was somewhere else. And then there was me, physically there, but mentally, I was off in another world, replaying old conversations, stressing over future deadlines, thinking about everything except the moment I was actually in. And that's when it hit me. How much of my life have I spent like this? Distracted, rushing, always half here, half somewhere else. Thinking happiness is in the next big thing, the next achievement, the next relationship, the next goal, while completely missing the life happening right in front of me. Buddhism has this core idea. The only moment that truly exists is now. The past? It's over. The future? Not here yet. But our minds? They're constantly bouncing between the two, stuck in regret or racing ahead with worry. And meanwhile, the present moment, the only place life is actually happening, is slipping right through our fingers. So what if we just stopped? What if we actually let ourselves be here? I used to think mindfulness was some complicated spiritual thing, something monks did in temples, not something you could bring into everyday life. But it's really just paying attention to your coffee, to your breath, to the sound of laughter in the next room. It's about noticing the details you usually rush past. There's this Zen saying, when drinking tea, just drink tea. Simple, right? But think about it, how often do we actually do that? How often do we let ourselves be fully in whatever we're doing, instead of half living it while thinking about something else? I remember the first time I really got this. It wasn't during some deep meditation. It was just a normal evening. I was walking home, my mind tangled in a mess of worries. But then, out of nowhere, I heard it. The sound of wind moving through the trees. And I mean really heard it. It was like my brain finally shut up for half a second, and suddenly the world came alive. The cool air, the rhythm of my footsteps, the way the streetlights cast long, golden shadows on the pavement. And in that moment, I realized something. Life is always happening. We just forget to show up for it. But why do we do that? Why do we spend so much time anywhere but here? Maybe it's because the present moment feels too simple. We're always chasing something: success, love, validation, the next big thing. We tell ourselves that happiness is just around the corner, always in some future version of our lives. Or maybe it's because being fully present means actually feeling things. When we stop running, we have to sit with whatever's here. Our anxiety, our boredom, the discomfort of silence. And that's hard. It's easier to scroll, to distract ourselves, to jump ahead to what's next instead of sitting still with what is. But here's the truth. Happiness isn't waiting for you in some distant future. It's right here in the tiny moments you keep overlooking. It's in the first sip of coffee in the morning. It's in the way light spills through your window. It's in the laughter of someone you love. It's in the breath you're taking right now. And if you're not paying attention, you're missing it. So how do we actually start living in the moment? First, breathe. Right now, take a deep breath. Feel it. The way the air moves in and out of your lungs. That's life. That's now. Whenever your mind starts racing, come back to your breath. It's always there, waiting to anchor you. Second, fully engage in whatever you're doing. If you're eating, taste your food. If you're walking, feel your steps. If you're talking to someone, listen, really listen instead of planning what you'll say next. Treat life like it actually matters. Third, appreciate the small things. We're always waiting for big moments to make us happy, but real joy is hidden in the smallest details. the warmth of the sun on your skin, the way your favorite song makes you feel, the smell of fresh laundry. Start noticing. Fourth, stop trying to be anywhere but here. The past is done. The future is out of your hands. But this moment, this one right here, is yours. And it's enough, because this is your life. Right now, I think back to that day in the cafe. The guy still glued to his phone. The woman still checking her watch. And me, so lost in thought I almost missed a moment I'll never get back. If I could go back, I'd do it differently. Put my phone down. I'd take a sip of coffee and really taste it. I'd listen to the sound of people talking, the clink of cups on saucers, the faint music playing in the background. I'd let myself be there, fully, completely, because that moment, I'll never get it again, and neither will you. So tell me, what's happening in your life right now that you're not paying attention to? And what would change if you finally decided to show up for it? You know, looking back, I can see it now. That night, the one where I thought my world had collapsed, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning, but I couldn't see it then. All I knew was that something I had built my life around was gone, and I had no idea what was next. And that's the thing, isn't it? Nothing stays the same. Not our happiness, not our pain, not even who we are. Everything shifts. Everything moves. And the more we try to fight it, the more we suffer. Think about it. Have you ever held on to something so tightly, so desperately, just because you were scared to lose it? A relationship that had already run its course? A job that no longer felt right? A version of yourself that you had outgrown? The harder we grip, the more it hurts. It's like holding onto a rope that's pulling away from you. The tighter you squeeze, the deeper it cuts. But if you just let go, if you loosen your grip, stop resisting, that's when you finally find peace. That's when you make space for something new. There's this Japanese practice called Kintsugi. It's the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, they highlight them. They don't see them as flaws. They see them as part of the story, as proof that something broken can still be beautiful. And maybe that's what life is doing to us when things fall apart. It's not breaking us. It's remaking us. So if you're in that place right now, if life feels like it's falling apart, I want you to ask yourself this. What if this isn't the end? What if this is just the start of something you can't see yet? Because one day you might look back and realize that this moment, the one that feels impossible right now, was actually the thing that set you free. And hey, if this message hit home for you, share it. Because trust me, someone out there needs to hear this today. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what's one thing in your life that felt like a loss, but looking back, turned out to be a blessing? I'd love to hear your story.